All right, welcome to this edition of More Than Velocity podcast. We're going to be talking about how we can intersect between strength and spin. Um, we're here with some of the members of the PitchLogic team, and we'll let them get into it in a little bit. But for us, we want to figure out how can we make the translation between training and also performance. That's called the transfer of training effects. And we're joined by one of the faculty members I work with is Dr. David Szymanski, who does a whole bunch for Louisiana Tech University, and our student, Chris Watson, who has done some really cool stuff looking at forearm strength biases. Are you more supinated or pronated in your strength profile? And what happens, to the spin characteristics? And we know that having better action on the ball, it allows you to have less hard contact. And, that ultimately leads to wins. But first, I want to turn it over to some of the people with PitchLogic, excuse me, to talk a little bit about their product. This might be really new for people with ArmCare. And I think it's a great tool. It's something that I use working with Jordan, consulting for athletes, being able to count throws, look at velocity, look at how different grips are affecting the baseball, especially important for me where I'm working with injured athletes and we really want to scale workload. I'll turn it over to Larry if you want to talk a little bit about it, and we can pass that over to Steven to fill in any gaps.
Yeah, well, with full deference, I'll give it right to Stephen because he invented it. So he's the founder and invented it, and I came on shortly after they got going to give the baseball perspective from the baseball side. So Stephen, why don't you go ahead and explain exactly what your baby does?
Sure. So PitchLogic's an entire pitching measurement system that's wrapped up inside of an actual baseball. So it's super easy to use. You just pair it to your phone, to the PitchLogic app, and you can get all the same sorts of pitching metrics that you'd get from much more expensive systems. But we're talking about things like pitch movement, velocity, and ball flight metrics, but we're also talking about some biomechanical things like arm slot and extension as well. So one of the things we're able to do there is kind of help get that bigger picture of how you're performing. And we have a piece called StuffPL that is an AI-based system that basically recognizes how different types of pitches perform in an actual game situation. So we think that's a really important tool to take all of that and put it together and say, hey, this changeup coming out of your arm slot paired with your fastball maybe needs a little bit of work. And what direction do you need to be trying to move it in to make it a little bit better? Or, hey, you've got a much better slider than your curveball. Maybe focus on that, those sorts of things.
And the perspective that I lent to it was that it's great to have the numbers and it's great to have the results, but we're still dealing with a human body that's trying to combine a large number of motions to end up with that final result. And we can analyze the result and we can finally get down to a point where we understand what works best for each individual and then tailor his program to work for him, show him the results of what he's doing and allow him to make progress and improve. And also, as he gets further down the road, understand how his body's working to prevent injury and stay away from some of the high stress movements that sometimes get involved with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's to me, it's a beautiful blend of having something that's very advanced, something that's would be from an expensive technology, and being able to utilize this anywhere in the world. I mean, that's kind of been an advantage for me with the remote services that I provide. I want to turn it over to Dr. David Szymanski and talk a little bit about the lab and how extensive it is there and how we are really digging into things like this. What we've used to test. People might not know how are we creating the intersection between strength and skill. And really all that we have going on at Louisiana Tech. I call it a baseball science masters of what they're getting because it's so deep. But I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Z. You can talk a little bit about that.
Collectively, our labs are called the Human Performance Laboratories, and they are made up of the Applied Physiology Lab, the Sport and Movement Science Lab, and then Minds and Motion Lab, and then our weight room. And we try to test a myriad of variables with our baseball players at Louisiana Tech, and the coaching staff has really allowed us to do those things. We've worked with them with our strength and conditioning and then also the testing, and we've done that for 4 years with this particular coaching staff. And then on their previous coaching staffs, I also worked with them, but didn't have all the technology that I have accessible to me today. So in our applied physiology lab, for example, we have an isokinetic device, which is the Biodex, which allows us to look at the arm speed, for example, of an internal and external rotation at 90 degrees at different speeds. And then we see the different peak torque or forces that an athlete might be producing. We've also been able to look at the elbow as it goes through elbow flexion extension, forearm flexion extension, and pronation supination. And so those variables allow us to identify strengths or weaknesses of a baseball pitcher in particular prior to the baseball season beginning. And then, like the ArmCare information, I color code it to let the coaches and the players know who is good, who's okay, and maybe there's some warning signs that maybe there's some weaknesses. One side, maybe external rotation compared to internal rotation of the shoulder, for example. And then we are also doing the ArmCare testing, which is the isometric testing, during that same time, but then we're also doing it during the off season, during their scrimmages or inter squad games. And then at times we've done it through the baseball season. And sometimes that, just because of timing and where they are and what we're doing, that sometimes becomes a challenge, but most of the time we've been able to do it. Also in that lab, we're measuring body composition. So we've got some nice research that's coming out on that as it relates to lean body mass as opposed to just body mass, because there is the saying mass is gas, whereas most recently some of our research is indicating that it's lean muscle mass or body mass that equals gas more than just body mass itself. Then downstairs in our spaces, we have a sport and movement science lab where it's a motion capture system where we have a pitching mound that has 2 embedded force plates, one for the back or drive leg, one for the stride or lead leg, and then motion capture with reflective markers that allow us to calculate the forces, joint angles, and those types of things. In addition to using, at the time, we had Rapsodo, and we were looking at all the spin rates and velocities of the baseball. And then that relates to work that Chris Watson, who's here with us as one of our graduate students who'll be finishing up his thesis this summer quarter. And then he'll talk about what he's done for his research today. And then we have now TrackMan at the baseball stadium that allows us to get even more information. And Chris can talk more about that because he was an integral part of all of that with the baseball season and this year in particular, and what his role will be with Louisiana Tech baseball in the future. And again, I'll let him talk about that and maybe what direction they might be going, as maybe he's had some conversations with the coaches about it. And then all the strength testing that we do, whether it's a back squat, for example, or a bench press or a 1-arm row, I've done those consistently over the years. And we're looking at how that might impact a player, because I agree with your comments that you've made. I think probably on most, if not all your videos, strength matters. Because if you're not a strong human being, then I think then there's possibility of weakness somewhere in the kinetic chain. And if that weakness becomes exposed, then that might mean an arm injury, and we're trying to offset those as best we can. So that kind of gives you an idea of our labs spaces that relate to how we're doing the sports science for the game of baseball. And then we try to integrate it, as I said, off season for sure is happening at a large rate. In season, again, it's with the TrackMan data in the stadium, it's now easier to get some information in-game stuff. And then how are we relating these things to one another, whether it's isokinetic compared to isometric devices, whether it's strength compared to these things, body compositions, but then we're also looking at the game or metrics of the game, pitching metrics, and then either wins and losses and all the things that you would have for statistics, trying to look at those variables. And then trying to make some heads and tails of it, because there's so much information, you could really be drowning in this information. And if you might not know where you want to look or what others have looked at and how we might try to build upon that. So I think that gives you an idea of our lab space, what we're doing with our baseball program here, and how we're trying to help the players and the coaches understand it better. And then Chris, if you would, why don't you just provide some of your insight that you were able to do this year And I think that would give them some greater ideas about what we've been doing.
Yeah, for sure. So my role with Louisiana Tech these past 2 years is kind of a hybrid role of I've worked with Dr. Szymanski in the weight room with all of the strength and conditioning. And then I've also worked directly with the baseball team as the director of analytics, really understanding all of the ball flight information. How can we use the TrackMan and Rapsodo to make player development plans, and really at the end of the day, just make our pitchers better. So the biggest thing that I saw over the 2 years is that pitchers really have a pronation or supination bias. There's very few that are really, really good at both spinning a breaking ball and throwing a changeup or a high efficiency fastball. And what I wanted to look at in my thesis is there just a skill to throwing those types of pitches? Is it all in their mechanics? Or maybe is it more of a forearm strength bias where we can measure different strengths in pronation and supination, measuring their forearm pinch and grip strength, measuring different ranges of motion and anthropometrics to see if any of those variables are connecting to the three metrics that I used were fastball spin efficiency to see if a pitcher was able to stay behind the ball or if they were cutting it a little bit. And then for changeups and breaking balls, I was looking at their changeup movement, how much it was different than their fastball. And for breaking balls, I was just simply looking at the spin rate. And would you guys like me to go into the results from there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd love for you to communicate those. Yep.
Yeah, sure. So the biggest things that I found were that for spin efficiency, that was the greatest, most impactful relationship. And that was going to be that supination strength. Pitchers that had greater isokinetic strength on that device that Dr. Szymanski talked about had.
Hey, real quick, go over pronation and supination, because we do have some younger, we have a lot of guys that are older and in baseball front offices that watch this, but we have a wide audience on here. So go over pronation and supination as well, real quick, and show it so that way they can kind of see on the camera as well.
Yeah, sorry about that. So forearm pronation and supination, it's going to be how the forearm rotates. So when you're rotating into a palms down position, rotating your thumb inwards, that's going to be pronation. Whereas when you're rotating into a thumbs up position, rotating your thumb outwards, that's going to be supination. So with this project, my idea was as you get into the position of throwing a breaking ball, more of a supinated position, the pitchers stronger in that area are going to be able to spin a better breaking ball, whereas the pitchers that are stronger in pronation and bringing that thumb downwards are going to be better at turning over a changeup and having greater changeup movement in that area. And the last piece with fastball spin efficiency, that's going to be how true the backspin is on a fastball. And if the pitcher is stronger in the position of pronation, they're probably going to be able to stay in that position. Whereas if they get into a stronger position of supination, they're probably going to have some cut on that fastball or lower spin efficiency.
That's
That
exactly
was
how
so
good that
exciting. We had
information
balloons
was.
coming up. That's right.
Yeah, I don't know what
That's how good
happened
that
right there.
information was.
It's because you're speaking the truth.
One of the things we've talked about a lot with that natural pronation and supination, one of the guys we work with, and he's been a big PitchLogic user for a long time, is Clay Holmes with the New York Yankees. And he's obviously known as a big sinker ball guy, and that creating that high spin efficiency four seamer is not something that he naturally gravitates to. And he has had one of the things he's identified is really being a natural supinator. And one of the pieces there is that when his spin efficiency is lower, he's not really cutting the ball the same way that somebody throwing a cutter would, in that the spin direction doesn't move toward the glove side. So when he loses that spin efficiency, he's able to get sink and arm side movement, but rather than just a lower spin efficiency by itself. So that's kind of one of the interesting effects we see as well with throwing sinkers versus four seamers on that natural supination that we've encountered.
And what's been fascinating about that to me is that I was a big time pronator. I threw over 1,700 innings in the big leagues, but I attended the University of Michigan before I made it to Major League Baseball, and they used the old crash dummy cameras to actually test me back in the day. And on my fastball, from the direct overhead view, you could see the X on the palm of my hand as I threw my fastball. So big time torque on the elbow, but that much pronation, not on the changeup as much, but more on the fastball. And so Clay and I, diametrically different actions with the hand, same kind of result, which was just fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. All those supinator pitchers, it's probably best that you flip them around to that two-seam grip, and then all of a sudden they get that natural arm side run and sink that all pitchers want versus maybe the little bit of cut that they'd have if they tried to throw the four seam.
Yeah, the one thing that I wanted to ask you, Chris, because we've gone through your thesis, explain kind of all the connections. I don't believe, do we find anything with fastball velocity? It was more spin characteristics, but was there anything that actually influenced the velocity component with the forearm strength aspects?
There was not any significant relationship to velocity. I got a little bit sidetracked with the balloons, but the biggest spin characteristics that we saw from this were with the spin efficiency, with increased supination strength in that position, was going to lead to lower spin efficiency. Increased pronation strength caused a higher spin efficiency, and the greatest impact of all was pinch strength. So just squeezing with their thumb, index, and middle finger, really using the FDS and the FCU of the forearm muscles, that really caused an increase in spin efficiency and a better true carry fastball through the zone.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of where I really love the work, because it's on the intersection of performance and also health. I know you gave a couple abbreviations of these muscles, and for people who want the technical terms, it's the flexor digitorum superficialis and the flexor carpi ulnaris. These are very significant stabilizers of the inner elbow. So, things that we're seeing, I think, with the current pitch clock issues, I don't think it's particularly the pitch clock itself. It's the conditioning effect of the forearm, that when these muscles are weakened, you're putting a lot more stress on the inner elbow, you're putting more stress on the ligament. But this study actually intersects the performance side. We look at, and Chris was talking about the pinch grip strength, in having that impact on the spin efficiency. If we're improving that component of our forearm strength, we're also, impacting, health, which is a huge deal. I'm going to turn it over to Jordan. Jordan, when Chris is talking about spin efficiency and some of these metrics, I'm wanting to know if you can kind of translate it into your experience of how that is influencing actual performance. Any kind of associations you've seen with certain pitchers, guys that you've worked with, where that would be, an important quality in missing bats.
So I think, Stephen, you've made a very good point that spin efficiency, depending on the type of fastball you're throwing, can be very, very good for you or very bad for you. If I'm trying to throw a two seam and it's freakishly efficient, probably not the best solution. Or if I'm trying to throw a slider and I want high spin efficiency, that's not a good solution. But if I'm throwing a curveball, spin efficiency could be my friend. So we also have to, this is where this is going to turn into multi-segment podcast that we do. So just to give like the bare bones is you kind of want to look at where a guy's, I'll give a real world example is I had a pitcher throwing it's actually a guy we work with Bonner. He was throwing his slider, and we found that we want his spin efficiency on his slider because we want to throw it hard with that glove side action. And he's been doing really well this year with it, where previous years he was like 65% spin efficiency. We dropped it down to like 43. 40 to 45% efficiency was his sweet spot. And right now, I think that, gosh, the swing and miss rate on his slider is like the best that it's been. But by taking that, we didn't sacrifice velo. We only lost about 2 miles an hour on it, but we're increasing and maximizing his velocity and movement shape. So you really got to, hammer into each athlete because everyone is going to be a little bit different. And then I'll use another example. I won't give the name of the player. He's playing in Japan right now, but he got to the big leagues with the Diamondbacks. He was with the Blue Jays. We actually traded him to the Diamondbacks, Ryan. He was in our weighted ball program. He would throw a four seam, and everyone wanted him to throw a four seamer. When we got a specific director pitching in, everyone had to throw four seamers. But he would throw a two seam fastball that actually had like 23 inches of induced vertical break, and his four seam had like 17. So I just said, tell everyone you're throwing a four seamer and throw your two seamer. He ended up making a couple $1 million off of it, so not a bad gig. So it's important to understand that we can classify it however we want, but we want to individualize off the pitcher. One other thing I want to touch on real quick, Dr. Szymanski was mentioning, TrackMan, Rapsodo, these other technologies. They're all great. They're fantastic. I obviously have a heavy bias to making affordable player development plans. We just had a couple players go throw at some big time universities that threw on TrackMan. And because at least I have the relationship with the coach, they sent me their TrackMan reports. And I got it. I compared it to my PitchLogic data. And the one thing I'll say is with PitchLogic data, you're going to get some outliers. But if you look at things over the average, it averages out the exact same as TrackMan. So for me, it's an affordable way to actually do pitch development. And we found the same thing, looking at a whole bunch of different things. I got buddies in other organizations looking at stuff. So yeah, you might get one, like for instance, I have a couple on Braden Bonner that registered 103 miles an hour, but his average velo is still averaging out what he's doing in the season. His max velo is still right in that 96, 97 range. So the 103 is obviously an outlier, but you're going to get that with any tech when it comes down to it. There's always going to be some outliers. So, you mentioned some other ones in there, but for me, PitchLogic, if you use this thing over the long haul, you get a very, very good data set that you can carry with you. Hopefully that makes sense on everything I was just going over there.
Yeah, the biggest piece, because we have such varied backgrounds. We got a former major league player, we have an engineer, has put this together, yourself as a former major league pitching analyst, and helping us with return to throw programs and pitch development with some of our private clients, and then we get Chris is like this kind of hybridized guy who also was a strength coach and a college baseball player. There's all these different pieces, and what we're talking about, I think, is like how to fit them together.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes like people might be frustrated with ball movement, and it's a training element. The other thing that we can safely say, when you want to improve your spin efficiency or any other elements of spin, that needs to come with a training process. And I've seen that. I've seen, especially when pitchers are throwing fork balls or splitters, there is some significant forearm fatigue that kind of follows that. So, if you're a coach out there and you're only one dimensional, let's just say you're only focused on strength, or you're only focused on, your pitch characteristics, you're really missing the boat. Because you need the outcomes to know how they play out, but then you can also take those outcomes, especially when Chris starts publishing this stuff. I know he's kind of home catching his breath, and we're on him to, finish get his thesis defended and published. But we have to look at this and say these are trainable characteristics. Sometimes when we go to, I know when we were with the Angels and we were in the draft room and we were looking at things that were modifiable and non-modifiable, all of these features that we're talking about with the ball and training are modifiable to create a better prospect, and if we're able to create better prospects and we have healthier ones because we're paying attention to forearm strength, if we make it sexy by understanding what it's going to do to the ball, right? I think we're going to have a healthier baseball community. That's kind of what, Chris, I want to push you, get this stuff published, because we need to get it out there. We need our audience to understand, how to combine, these technologies, and to actually, focus on both, and not just saying, okay, injury prevention, which isn't exciting, but it's like, now you're going to improve your competitiveness, so that's a big deal.
Hey, on that, I think a great place to kind of take this would be from Larry's perspective of everything that David and Chris just went over on this information, this research. How would you take that information and rewind the clock? If you had that, how would you alter or enhance, not even necessarily alter, but how would you improve your development process that you had from when you were playing?
Well, we've talked about it a number of different ways. We talked about blend. Ryan brought up blend. We brought up individuals. We have to understand that everybody is an individual person with their own characteristics. And any part of the throwing process can throw the whole process off of the end result to get the numbers we're looking for. What we want to try to do is repeat the best of what we do, eliminate the worst of what we do. And when we start seeing the characteristics of how we do things well, then get some repeatability with that. One of the things I like about the PitchLogic baseball is the fact that you can run a session. You have the video, you have the numbers, everything is right at your fingertips, and you can compare your best to your worst and find out what you were doing instead of just hopefully remembering what you had done sometime previously. We talked the last time we talked. I threw 281 innings my first full season in the major leagues. I was 22 years old, and my arm slot went from here down to here, and I had shoulder problems. And I told my pitching coach about it. And he said, "When does it hurt?" I said, "When I lift my hands over my head." And he said, "Well, don't do that. Start from your waist, and then just it'll only hurt half the time." And that was the way we approached it. But we could see the differences if we'd have had this kind of technology. And today's modern athlete that has the advantage of people studying it can break that down to the proper way to get maximum results and have the information to do it scientifically instead of just totally by feel. I think blend is the most important thing. It's got to be the feel of it combined with the scientific aspect of it and make it all come together in one package. But understand that if you take an 8-inch drop step instead of a 6-inch drop step, everything's going to be a little bit off along the way as well.
We talked with a coach a little while back that he had a kid who was trying to throw a slider, and he said, well, he's working on the slider, but he's still doing one thing right and 3 things wrong. And we said, all right, let's break down what those things are. And we went through each one of those things, and the 3 things he was doing wrong to throw a slider were actually 3 things that would be doing it right if he was trying to throw a curveball. And so I said, it really sounds like he's doing 3 things curveball and 1 thing slider. And the same thing happens if you're trying to throw a 4-seamer versus a sinker. So when you put together something like ArmCare, where you can understand your physical toolbox and grow those tools, along with PitchLogic, understand, hey, I have a lot of tools to throw a great sinker, but this one piece isn't in alignment with all those other things, then it helps you direct where do I need to focus my attention and in which direction am I trying to go. You pick one, because if you're somewhere halfway in between the two is where guys just consistently get crushed. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the idea of a dead zone fastball. And I think the same thing really exists with breaking balls. But if you're right in the middle of the pack, that's exactly what batters are looking for, used to seeing, and are going to really be able to get a piece of more often than not.
The one thing that Larry mentioned, and I think, we've been talking about the actual ball flight, but the release point. And I know we've talked about the spin and some of those strength qualities that we have, but the release point is actually really more, I guess, interesting to me on the sense of understanding fatigue. Fatigue is like the biggest problem, as we mentioned, forearm fatigue, and what that could mean to compromising the elbow. But when we have shoulder fatigue, those are things that are going to affect where the ball's coming out, right? And people ask me at times, Ryan, what's the biggest predictor of injuries in pitchers? And it's pitching. If you throw more, your risk is going to be more. And so, that's another thing that we look at with our athletes. Jordan and I, there's a test called scaption, and it's just an open long arm test where you're pushing, your arms locked. But that's really kind of the strength that's telling you what is the musculature that's holding my position at ball release. And when you look at 3D, you'll actually see that there's a period when the ball is released where the arm is actually stopped. You can't make any more, like you can't have any more velocity that stops, and then you're applying the friction on the ball, and then all of a sudden it's a deceleration of that velocity. Because you look at a position graph and you can't look at any rates of change in position there. So, all of these things come together, and I don't know, Chris, where his career is going to go in the future, but this blend of strength and skill, I really do think is the way. We're using the ball, like what I'm talking about is we're using the ball, not, Jordan's more focused on what's going on with the baseball. I'm really focused on, the musculature and what's happening with the release point with the athlete to be consistent. Because if they're throwing more strikes, some of our guys pitch to contact, they get weak contact. If they lose that, or they're not able to get swings, now all of a sudden this overuse risk really starts to escalate. So that's a cool thing that I'm really excited about the PitchLogic ball. I want to ask you guys with PitchLogic, if you're able to talk about, what's down the road in the future of this technology. We just released our individualized pitch count metrics from Strength Qualities. All our different metrics give you an adjusted pitch count based on PitchSmart standards. But I want to know if you could talk about any, innovative ideas that are going to be coming down the line for PitchLogic.
Sure. I think our biggest area of growth will be along the lines of what we started with the Stuff PL system. So more intelligent analysis of, okay, you've got all this data, what the heck does it mean? And if you're a D1 coach, you probably have the tools and resources to understand that yourself, along with your staff. But as a high school player, or at other levels of the sport, that can be pretty intimidating to try to put all that stuff together and understand what you're doing. So with Stuff PL as it stands today, we can look at any one of your pitches that you throw, your curveball, your fastball, et cetera, and give you an assessment of how well that's working and some ideas on things that you might want to focus on to improve it. But as we grow that, understanding how your pitch is developing over time, building out sort of a set of goals and a plan to achieve those, and understanding where you are in your season. If you're in the middle of the competition part of your season, you're probably not really focused on pitch design, and maybe it's more important to keep track of, hey, all those things I did in the off season to get my slider right, am I maintaining that through the season, or am I all of a sudden losing track of my grip, or fatigue's building up and my arm slot's getting lower and lower, and is it time to go figure out what's going wrong and get back to where I was? So just more of that context and more of that sort of intelligent analysis built into the app to help guide you to use the data. I think that sounds like what you guys are doing with dynamic pitch counts a lot along the same way. You're collecting a lot of data and just helping people understand how to use it more effectively.
And one of the things that PitchLogic does have is it has a function that shows your last touch. So it shows where your fingertip, it actually comes off the baseball at release. So if you're off to the side a little bit because you've got some shoulder fatigue, well, then you may cut the ball a little bit more. And when you go back and you look at the information, you can see, well, I'm supposed to be behind it. I'm not. I'm on the side of it. And I know there's got to be a reason for it. Fascinating, the research you guys are doing about fatigue, and how are you going into a game? What percentage of your optimum strength are you at that day? As a pitcher, when I made 36 starts, I knew that 10 of them, there was no reason I should lose. I knew that 10 of them, there was no reason I should win, except I was going to fight like heck. And then that middle group was kind of the average of what I normally was. So 10 times so good you can't be bad, 10 times so bad you can't be good. And then what do you do with those middle ones in order to make it a good year? And I think pitch counts now are different for every guy on different days. They're going to be different to how you can be effective. And the people that can start mastering that, figuring out, yeah, he can throw 100 pitches, but the last 20 aren't good. We have to start getting more into those areas. And that's how teams that break it down really well start being more successful.
Yep. So
couldn't have said that better. That's a really good.
I love it. Chris, I want to kind of turn it over to you. We got a few minutes left. What's next, in terms of the progression for what you've learned, and, where are you taking this research now, in your mind, of where this can be even furthered and more detailed in terms of performance and health?
Yeah, for sure. I think we talked a ton about individualization and how every single pitcher is different and how it's really important to understand the unique needs of your pitcher. You also have to be able to monitor them and be able to train them based on that individualization. So like you guys were talking about, it was really cool to see this year, some pitchers' release heights were dropping, other pitchers, their forearms muscles might be fatigued as the season went on. Some pitchers lack the ability to turn over a changeup deeper in games, and then others, breaking balls velocities really dropped off as they continued throughout that game. So all three of those pitchers might have the same fastball velocity throughout the entirety of the game, but there's a lot of different metrics, whether it be with ArmCare or with PitchLogic, the spin information that you really have to pay attention to for your pitchers throughout the game, both for the performance and the injury prevention side. And I think the biggest thing I want to do going forward, besides understanding all of that information on our pitchers, is tying in the biomechanics side and really doing motion capture to understand, okay, we have all these physical measures, we have all these anthropometrics, ranges of motion, that all does impact ball flight and how the ball is spinning, but how may stride direction impact a pitcher, or if they have a short or longer arm path with the amount of elbow flexion they have. I think all of those factors could also play into how the ball is spinning, and future research will have to help me understand how to put all of those pieces of information together.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Jordan, I don't have very much more to add. I think this is a pretty comprehensive podcast on, the intersection of strength and spin and everything in between. Do you have anything, buddy?
No, I just think everybody should rewind whatever that was, about 5 minutes, and go back to listen to what Larry said. And you've heard us talk about it, of if you had, 40 outings, 10 of them are going to suck, 10 of them are going to be fantastic. The 20 in between are what actually make you money when it comes down to it. And that's understanding how you're fatiguing, how you adjusting to make sure on your day 3 bullpen or day 4 for the college guy, that when day 7 rolls around, you've stacked the deck in your favor, that those middle games are going to swing towards win. So using your strength data, and we've worked with a lot of those universities to do it, where they're making sure when their strength is down on that bullpen day, dial back. You don't have to throw 35 pitches. You don't have to long toss. You can actually take, the need a day, take a day mentality. You hear that in Pro Bowl a lot, need a day, take a day. Take a day to get yourself back. And then so you have no limits when you get over to that 7th day. So just like you said, Larry, you can fight your absolute tail off when you get the ball given to you, because you're recovered, you're ready to go. So you can push those 20 outings, 16 outings into that positive win category. Go back now roughly 7 minutes and make sure you go back and listen to what he said, because that right there is a wealth of knowledge that if you're a young player, or even a lot of those older players that don't quite have the process figured out yet, that's the difference maker. That's going to help you stay competing at a high level. That's all I got. I don't know if anybody else has anything, but I feel like that's a good spot there. What do you got, Dave?
Well, one of the things that now leads into like game performance, one of the research posters we're going to be presenting this week in Baltimore is how does the isometric strength relate to game pitching metrics. So I'm just going to give you some quick things here. Pitchers with the greater arm score relative to lean body mass, total arm score, internal rotation strength, fastball grip strength had more wins, more innings pitched, strikeouts, and less walks per inning, and less walks per 9 innings pitched. So this just helps support why this information, collecting it, identifying it, and then making decisions can give you potentially more wins or just greater success, either for the individual pitcher or for the respective team. And this is where, again, the blending of all of this becomes so important, to have people who communicate with each other, potentially speak a little bit different languages, but still speak the same language, right? And then we can take this information and understand it and how it applies, because to the point you made earlier, we need something that's simple to test. The isokinetic device, I need 2 weeks to collect information on 21 pitchers, for example. The ArmCare can be done every day, before they pitch, after they pitch, and then in between when they're doing their bullpens. And that information becomes very valuable as to how somebody might make decisions about what they're going to do with their respective pitcher. And again, what Larry was talking about, individualizing programs, what Chris said, all of a sudden now this person might be able to do more this week because, and you have to then fill in that variable, or they might not be able to do these things because, and these scores might give them some idea about how to most effectively utilize that pitcher.
Yeah, well, I think we hit it. I mean, strength matters to spin, right? Strength matters to wins. But again, like we got to get people to understand that strength matters most. If you're a weak pitcher out there, you can see how it affects everything else around you. And you know, we got a lot of our kids walking around where we don't know anything about their arms. So, you know, having the union between understanding your strength and testing, like David said, Dr. Z, and also, you know, with the guys from PitchLogic producing a great technology that you really understand what's coming out of the hand and where the hand is positioned, you got an opportunity to make baseball a much safer and more effective place for all. So thanks to everybody. I thought this was a great podcast. And for everybody listening, this is Ryan from More Than Velocity and Jordan, and stay tuned for more.
Thanks for having us,
Thank you,
guys.
guys.
Thank you.